Hello, welcome to Galactic Initiative. I'm your host, Jeff. Joining me as usual, David and Sean, and we have a special guest, Stacy, for a discussion of our channel's first year in action and the Walt Disney Company's handling of Star Wars. Welcome, David.
Hello, sir.
Welcome, Sean.
Hello, my friend.
Welcome, Stacy.
Hello there.
Let's begin with a few questions about the media and Galactic Initiative. For fans, where is the fair line between criticism and hypercriticism? In other words, at what point does negativity overtake reasonableness?
Definitely, I tend to kind of go to the most extreme and kind of pull towards more normal behavior. But definitely, anytime someone is bullied or attacked for their opinions, for portraying someone in a movie, in George Lucas's case, I mean, he's constantly being ridiculed for any number of things. I think that's definitely going too far. Lucas eventually said that he wasn't having fun with it anymore. He couldn't create what he wanted to create. And so he sold it to Disney, which maybe there's a little poetic justice with Kathleen Kennedy having it up in that respect. But I think she's had some issues of her own. Jake Boyd, I mean, he was just a little boy, and he got bullied by the fandom. Ahmed Best, who played Jar Jar, became suicidal and eventually turned that around. So that's kudos to him. Kelly Marie Tran, pretty much forced off of social media. And then I think the next kind of less severe thing would probably be fan edits. I'm not a big fan of fan edits to movies in general, specific to Star Wars as well. I just think it's disrespectful to everyone who was in on the creation of the movie. They worked hard to do the best they could possibly do, and to have people come behind them and say, "Well, this is how I would have done it," especially me as a writer. When someone says, "Why didn't you do this?" or "Why didn't you do that?" I actually said, "Well, maybe there's a story for you to tell. So why don't you try? Why don't you try writing a story, and that can be your take on it." On a much less severe, I think when someone doesn't like something in Star Wars, they tend to rehash it over and over and over again. At least that's been my experience. And I'm not sure what they're hoping to get out of that, whether it's getting confirmation from other people or just having their voice heard. I'm not sure. But I do believe in general that negativity begets negativity. And the more negative you are, instead of really trying to understand and go do a deep dive into trying to figure out why you don't like something or why you do like something when someone else doesn't, I think that it kind of gets to a pointless state.
Well, and I would agree with your earlier points about bullying and attacking people, whether they be the writers, the directors, the actors, actresses, anyone really involved in making of the franchise. Attacking them for things that are not related to the product itself. I mean, that is of course out of bounds. That is bullying, right? We understand that. I think that because we live in this culture of offense in present day, sometimes people blur the line between legitimate criticism of the product and criticism of the people. Nitpicking and critiquing and all that stuff. I mean, fans have been doing that for all things for all times. I mean, the term fan is obviously, a shorting of the word fanatic, which implies some unreasonable behavior to begin with. But there are areas to criticize, obviously, in the Star Wars universe, and it's not just in the Disney era. I mean, there are some things about the prequels that didn't align well with the original trilogy, and again, people have the right, and if they've noticed this thing, to call it out. Going after George Lucas, maybe. I mean, he wrote it. He created it. I mean, we can always disagree and be civil. And I think that's really the big thing here is, the civility piece, and remembering that we are talking about a fictional universe and fictional characters, and there's literary criticism to be had about scripts and stories, and there's technical criticisms to be had about special effects and things of that nature, and we should all be able to discuss that. But I think the climate that we live in right now, any kind of criticism, valid or not, tends to wind up escalating very fast. There used to be in the fandom, like for Star Trek, for example, obsessing over the little details was celebrated. I mean, there was a series of books that came out called The Nitpicker's Guide, and it went episode by episode, and it listed out every single error of continuity, every production error, every special effects error, costume flub, you name it. They put them out for the original series and for Next Generation, and these were sanctioned by Paramount. They celebrated this stuff. They thought it was great. It was fun. It was a way for real deep nerds to go real deep nerding and talk about how you could see the reflection of the camera rig in the mirror in the background of episode whatever of Next Generation, and it's silly because the guy, it's like when we found the jeans guy in Mandalorian, stuff like that. These things are fun. We call them out, but we don't go after the director and say that person is a terrible garbage human being because they couldn't even figure out how to get the guy in the jeans out of the back of the episode. So I don't know. I think that this is a product created by people, and people sometimes make mistakes. You bring up fan films. I mean, what were the special editions of Star Wars? I mean, those were Lucas's fan films. There was people who worked very hard on making the original trilogy, and they won Oscars for their work, spawned a billion podcasts and discussion groups, and then he came back 20 years later, completely realigned the vision of the films. And I found that to be a little bit cringeworthy when, Lucas was making his rounds and telling everybody, well, it wasn't the movie I wanted to make, so I made it and it's my movie. Yeah, that's great, but you've just told a bunch of people who worked very, very hard for you for many years creating the saga that their work wasn't good enough and that you've always been disappointed in it, and now it's better. Lucas probably didn't think too hard on or too deep about when he was saying it, but it's something that, I think is also worthy of criticism. I mean, he's changed the original so many times. Jeff did one of his Lightspeed reports on who shot first, and how many times has that changed since the original release between special editions and Blu-ray releases and now the Disney versions that are on streaming. The constant tinkering is something that I think is worthy of addressing. We should be able to ask him important questions and difficult questions about some of the choices that he's made. We talk about, the biggest thing for us, I think, on this show, and the guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we spend a lot of time talking about continuity and things that don't agree in universe. And you said you're a writer, and you obviously spend a lot of time thinking about plots and character development and whatever universe that you're writing in, whether it's a time period or whether it's a galaxy far, far away or whatever, there's rules, and the rules should guide everything that goes forward. Before A New Hope came out, nobody had seen a Star Wars movie. But since then, 44 years or so, we've had 12 theatrical releases, about, I think, 6 animated series, a couple of live-action TV shows. We've got video games, and we are starting to have an abundance of material, and we need to make sure that if it's going to all be interconnected, then it must abide by the rules of the universe. And I know things like the holiday special are clearly not in universe, but we see these things like the progression of the Force powers from the original trilogy and the kind of the prequels too, but the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy, and things don't agree, and this causes cognitive dissonance for the fans. Like fans are expecting certain things from the story, and when they happen and we see them and they don't work the way we think they should work, then we ask these questions, and unfortunately those questions have turned into some kind of civil war in the fandom where there's sequel people and non-sequel people or whatever, and there's all this fighting that goes on and a lot of name calling and shouting on the internet. So I will close by saying we should all be able to call out the things that we find in them. Perhaps they could have done better. And of course, we should also praise the things that we love, which I think we do a pretty good job of on this show. But again, we have to keep it civil.
When Stacey was talking, I actually wrote down the Lucas edit as something that I personally have an issue with. Once he went down that rabbit hole of editing stuff, I think he truly opened himself up to criticism. And I think, if you're not willing to criticize something that you're passionate about, I think it just sets you up for not being able to appreciate the good and the bad. The other thing, social media is absolutely a cesspool. It allows keyboard warriors to do their thing, basically bully. And it really takes a lot of this information and a lot of the stuff out of context, and people can interpret it in multiple different ways. Tran was bullied the way she was. I think Jake Lloyd, poor kid, I hope at some point he's able to be embraced more. Because, honestly, watching those documentaries, I don't necessarily believe it was his fault. Jake Lloyd was directed to act a certain way, and so was Jar Jar Binks. I think people have accepted Ahmed Best and Jar Jar Binks easier than Jake Lloyd, but he did get also ridiculed, and he thought about committing suicide, and he's been very open about that, which I think is great because it brings awareness to how the fandom has treated him, which is unfortunate. I worry with potential future movies that we could continue to go down this path of bullying and through social media and other things. Force powers, Sean, you talked about force powers. I actually was thinking about this earlier today, how in A New Hope, we started out with mind tricks. So I understand that things need to evolve. I totally understand that. But at what point enough is enough? Okay? Teleporting is a little wacky. Everybody now has even force lightning abilities. So I would really hope pull some of that back. The lightsaber going from one person to another, I had a big problem with that. So with that being said, I totally get where the nitpicking comes from because we are passionate about what we enjoy.
I would ask our guest, do you feel that our show up to this point has been overly critical or crossing the line in our criticism of the franchise?
There was one episode that I could not listen to, and I actually had to stop because I was yelling at my phone. That was the Rise of Skywalker episode because I loved it. And I was kind of listening to a lot of criticisms that I've heard over and over again. And I just was just like, they can't hear me. So life is too short. So I'm just going to stop listening now.
And that's fair. And I understand, that there are people who are huge fans of the sequel trilogy and they support it and they support what has gone forth since the Disney purchase. And while we are critical of the Rise of Skywalker, it's being intellectually honest about the situation. That we understand that J.J. Abrams was put in a very difficult position. He's been given a film that the way it ended almost looked like the end of a trilogy, and it didn't really leave any real open threads for him to explore. It also ignored many of the things that J.J. had done in the previous film, or had twisted them or changed them in such a way that there was no through line into a third film. And then, of course, we had the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher, but what he did with what he had was probably not the best that he could have done. And we were not necessarily happy about it. Now, I've always said that they are beautiful movies, and they feel like Star Wars movies. It's not like we got something completely weird and out of universe for the most part. The team at Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic and all those people make these gorgeous movies. But the planning of that trilogy, the purchase of Star Wars by Disney was a very weird thing because When they bought it, there was nothing in development. And, excuse me, they spent more money on Star Wars than they did on Marvel. They needed to justify that purchase, and they needed to start getting returns on the investment. And the short time span between films, if we look back at the original trilogy and whatnot, there was 3 years between films. That lets you have plenty of time to write and to pre-produce, and you have this vision from Lucas, which went through the first 6 films. And so I think that haste led to a lot of poor decisions, which then led to a trilogy that felt disjointed. It's an unfortunate series of events. Let's just call it that.
I think because of what they're doing with Mandalorian, and Jon Favreau this past week mentioned that the Mandalorian is going to really help bolster / support the sequels. So I think the supporting material, now that Disney is working on that, is definitely going to help in the long run. And if they would have just come out with an overall story arc that they would have all approved, and regardless of who's directing, if they would have had a clear vision of this is where we want to start, this is where we want to end, they could have wrapped it up in a nice, easy bow. And don't get me wrong, I loved Episode 8 as an individual movie, but did it help Episode 9 and Episode 7? Absolutely not. You got to have a story arc, and without that, you get what you get what we got.
In regards to J.J. Abrams, he signed on for one movie. That always bothered me a little bit. Like, okay, if you're gonna do Star Wars, do the whole trilogy. Don't just sign on for one and bring up all these questions for someone else to interpret. My criticism of Kathleen Kennedy, I think she does a great job as a producer, as the head of Star Wars and a CEO of a company or an IP. I think she had a lot of lessons to learn in how to navigate that. She's been a producer. Her entire career is about producing. And I think instead of being a CEO, she continued in the producing role and didn't allow for maybe a creative person to oversee the entire story arc.
There are more stories to be told with the sequels, but again, I think that honestly, I think it's kind of a wait and see what's going to happen with these other shows. See how much they are propping up the sequels. One of the things that really turned a lot of people off also, they have to find some type of a happy medium when it comes to merchandising. So if they could come up with some type of a good way to cross promote, as well as it was geared more towards kids than I would have liked. 3 Star Wars movies that are PG-13, and they just so happen to be like the best of all of them. Rise of Skywalker was PG-13, huh? All right. There is always exception to the rule.
Dark Ray. She bared her teeth at me, and I got scared. The place in the canon is what it is, right? For better or for worse, they're in the canon. From a purely selfish standpoint, I mean, I would like to see them reworked. And I guess this is maybe as not as a fan edit, but maybe as an official re-release of an extended cut or a remastered edition. Like we've seen for many years. Yeah, I would like to see it cleaned up. I'd like to see some of the storylines less disjointed and whatever you want to call it. But I don't think it's like, oh, they should be completely redone and we should hire new actors and actresses and then recycle a bunch of footage, etc. I know that there's talk about the multiverse thing where it's like, oh, we went into the world between worlds and we adjusted the force and now we're on a different timeline. I mean, that's very J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and I don't necessarily know if I like that either. All I want Disney to do at this point is learn from their mistakes. If they're going to make another trilogy of films, great. All the fans want is continuity. They want things to agree in universe and to carry a story, to its conclusion in a meaningful and satisfying way. Mando has kind of healed a lot of the rifts in the Star Wars fandom. I mean, it's very hard to find somebody who just isn't really kind of dead inside and overly salty that doesn't like The Mandalorian. And so things like that, if they can continue to make more media in the vein of The Mandalorian, in the sense that we're going to pick a spot in time in the Star Wars universe, and we're going to tell these adjacent stories, and we're going to tell things that are good and impactful and fun and exciting and all this stuff, but we'll make a nod occasionally. We'll say, it's the Battle of Tanab or whatever. And you're like, oh, I know that Lando made a move there. You can those types of things. You can pull those things in. And I know they're trying this with the High Republic, right? This is it's their Shadows of the Empire moment, right? They're doing the multimedia platform push. They're doing books and comics, and there's going to be a movie or a TV show associated with it at the end, in an era that we haven't really explored before. If done well, if it's done like The Mandalorian and done well, it will be fantastic. But they need to start doing more of that. I think that if they just focus on good stories, this is the thing. Focus on the good stories, and then we can worry about the rest of this stuff. And like David also said, if Disney worried a little bit less about putting the Star Wars logo on everything ever made and trying to get their money back that way, and if they made 4 or 5 really solid films that are going to gross a couple of $1 billion at the box office every time they come out, I mean, they're going to get their money back. And I mean, they're going to get it back pretty quick, as long as they keep their eye on what's important. And as with all cinema, as with all storytelling, it's plots and character. And if you do good plots and good characters, sky's the limit.
Personally, I loved the sequels. Were there problems? There were problems. I acknowledge that. I loved seeing how the Force can change and can be enhanced, and different people can get different powers at different times. I mean, that started with the prequels when Yoda sent Obi-Wan to Tatooine and said, "You're going to hear from Qui-Gon Jinn, and he's going to teach you something about the Force." Obviously, it's an ever-evolving thing, and I love seeing that. There's such a large gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens that you can have a ton of different stories that link it all together and give us more information about what's going to happen or what could possibly happen coming up. Such as, The Mandalorian did it with Baby Yoda doing the Force healing. You literally had to see that episode of The Mandalorian before you saw The Rise of Skywalker, when Rey did it to the snake and then Kylo Ren. So I thought that was pretty interesting in how they connected that. Now, I know they're saying that the Skywalkers are done. This is the end of the Skywalker story. However, Hollywood is pretty risk averse. There's a possibility of them coming back in about 20 years after a lot of the grumbling has probably died down by then. But there was a scene, and I don't know if you guys caught it. I don't know why I caught it, but when Kylo Ren brings Rey back, instead of putting his hand on her heart or her lungs where you would normally bring life back, he put it on her abdomen. So that's a possibility. That could also be where the PG-13 rating came in. But there was a lot of advertising. I tried to stay away from as much advertising, as many spoilers as I possibly could, because I wanted to go into it fresh. And that was really hard to do. But I agree that they're there, and I don't think the sequels are going to be rebooted in any way. Although I do think it's interesting, if they could release another version of it, kind of like what George Lucas did with the original trilogy. I don't know.
Be interesting to see if they do go down the George Lucas route and re-release it. People are begging for it because I know that a lot of people are struggling with Skywalker in there. how that movie turned out in terms of the choppiness. And in all honesty, did it really help the whole series? And does it really move the story forward?
I thought the backlash was so severe on The Last Jedi and the treatment of Luke Skywalker and how negatively that was taken by a portion of the fandom. I think it was important for them to see him how they always wanted to see him in the at the end of Return of the Jedi, right? They wanted a continuation of that. However, in The Last Jedi, they got a grumpy old geezer, which I thought was actually really interesting. Star Wars and how it's being told, or at least how Lucas told it, Empire Strikes Back was actually A New Hope reversed. Everything was upside down. So you had the space battle at the end of A New Hope. You have a ground battle at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. And so he basically flipped it upside down. He did the same with Return of the Jedi and the prequels. And so when you look at Star Wars from that kind of storytelling perspective, when you look at The Last Jedi and you see a grumpy old Luke compared to this very powerful Jedi, I think it's a much more interesting story. And I think a lot of people didn't really get there right away. I think some did and really loved it. And I think we're going to get more storytelling about that progression of him. I kind of hope we do. Yeah, he had the incident with Kylo Ren, and I have a whole theory about that. But I think there was probably more to it than just that. And I think it would just be really interesting to see how they can show that.
I am not ideologically opposed to the idea of world-weary, grumpy Luke. I think that there's a spot for that in the universe, right? I mean, I think that everybody enjoys Empire Strikes Back, and we all kind of, we like the darkness or the down ending of Empire because, I mean, ultimately it leads to triumph and the rise of good over evil and the hero's journey and the Campbellian myth. But I would not have been opposed to seeing in the new trilogy, have it be again focused on Luke trying to rebuild the Jedi Order, having something good, bad there, and then have him get to that low point, and we get the world weary Luke who's like, nope, I'm just going to go to Octu and bail. I don't think that Kylo Ren should have been Luke's nephew. I don't think it should have been Han and Leia's child. I think that's a very tragic and depressing kind of end to their story. All the main characters, really, when you think about it. I mean, Han and Leia get together as we wanted them to at the end of Jedi. They have a child and they form this new republic in the ashes of the Empire, and they split, and Han becomes a loser and an absentee dad and a deadbeat hustler and gets killed by his own kid, and then his son turns into a Sith Lord or an emo Sith Lord or whatever, kills his mom for all intents and purposes. She dies saving, I don't know, it all gets very strange in The Rise of Skywalker. But you look at these characters, and then Luke, of course, is given up on the world. And you're talking about a guy who, I mean, and this is, again, this goes back to my comment about consistency and about continuity. The character of Luke Skywalker risked everything because even though Darth Vader had murdered the Jedi, murdered younglings, murdered everybody, consolidated power in the universe, and sworn fealty to a Sith Lord, Luke still believed that there was good in this person and that he could be redeemed and saved. And then we flash forward to The Last Jedi, and he's like, yeah, my nephew, he's been listening to The Cure, and he's wearing eyeliner, so I think I got to cut his head off while he's sleeping. I think that story could have been told in such a way where he could have had a student who betrayed or who went down the dark path and done it. But I just think that it was really painful to watch these legacy characters that we grew up loving and really like living that original trilogy, and that then they've all sort of been spun out into these less than better versions of themselves. And I guess that for me was my problem with all that. And it's like, if you wanted to do the Luke, like you can have the Luke, like his school collapses, the Sith return under his watch, and he's like, oh my God, I had all this pride. I thought I could have been the Jedi. I thought I was the chosen one. I hit the low. And then these new characters that you've introduced, like Rey, could come to him and assist him in pulling him out of that funk, save the universe. And then now you hand off that trilogy to these new characters, and then they carry it forward into their own trilogy, and you just get this continually perpetuating awesomeness of storytelling. And unfortunately, it didn't work out that way.
When we saw Luke try to turn Vader, and they started doing battle, basically Vader threatening to turn Leia to the dark side, and Luke just starts attacking him. There's a point in his attack where he crosses the line from Jedi into the dark side, and he cuts off Vader's hand, and he realizes, oh my gosh, I almost went there. So when Luke has that moment with Kylo Ren and he sees the darkness, I think he automatically goes back to that moment where he could have just gone full dark. He looked back on that at that moment and just said, oh my gosh, the darkness is back again. And it scared him. And he acted out of fear. And unfortunately, at that point, he couldn't take it back. The emotional impact of that for him was he basically let down his sister, his best friend, his nephew. His school got destroyed. And I think he had this incredible hubris, and it's the same hubris of the Jedi before him that did a disservice to Anakin Skywalker. He decided, you know what? It's just too dangerous. It's too dangerous, and I need to step away. It's no longer my fight. For Kylo Ren and Ben Solo, he's got this incredible heritage. That's got to be hard to live up to. I think that's why it was interesting that it was Han and Leia's son, not necessarily to the detriment of Han and Leia, but from my personal experiences, I come from a family that is really good with basketball, and I hate basketball. But I had a choice at one time in my life where I could follow that, or I could do my own thing and figure out who I was. And so I chose to follow my own thing. Yet everyone in our town questioned, why did I make that decision? So I kind of have an empathy with Kylo Ren on that. He's got this heritage that maybe he's struggling against, and as a reason to turn to the dark side. As you can see, I tend to go into, when I'm not quite understanding something, I'll find the character and I'll go deeper into what's not on the screen, what is inferred just from the character that I'm seeing.
One of my favorite things in the prequel trilogy is the manipulation of Anakin Skywalker by Palpatine. I would have liked to have seen more of it, because there's some moments where it feels slightly rushed, but this is something I can offer you, and these are things that they're hiding from you and all this stuff. I mean, we could have seen a very similar portrayal of that again as a subtext to this story. You've got Luke. Here's a guy who's clearly out of his league. Just a few films ago, he was a moisture farmer, and it would be very easy to see him make mistakes, screw things up, unintentionally. You throw in the fact that there is a manipulative character like a Snoke to play on the things that Stacy brought up. Aren't you tired of living in your parents' shadow? Aren't you tired of being judged by their successes? Don't you want to be your own man? You could have been the gardener or the guy down at the local bookstore. You could have been this friendly voice. Again, this is, I guess, goes back to one of our earlier points. Like we're criticize it because we love it. We want Star Wars to be the best, and we're not talking about drastically altering it. There are ways to fill things in. I am not a fan of the comic book novel back of a soup can kind of way that Lucasfilm is handling this filling in the blank stuff. And it starts with, for example, the novelizations of the films where they throw in a bunch of extra stuff in the novelizations and they say, oh, you have a question about tracking in hyperspace from The Last Jedi. Well, it's explained in the book. And I go, okay, well, why didn't you explain it in the film? And then we get the Monty Don Snoke Gardner series comic books. That's just 3-issue or 4-issue limited series. Or we get the one shot about why C-3PO has a red arm. This kind of stuff that if you want to put these things in the films, then put them in the films. But I'm not opposed to maybe in another film or in another live action TV show like The Mandalorian that we get hints to things, or we get like we were talking about the Force healing. We saw Grogu do it in the show right before the movie came out. Technically now in the timeline, we've seen this Force power has happened in the past, so it shouldn't be a surprise in the film. I get that, right? These are things that the writer group is supposed to be handling in the continuity department. And as long as whatever you come up within this framework, we're probably going to allow it. As long as it advances the overarching story, or even as a standalone episode, it doesn't screw things up. Now, you guys go right and come back and let's talk about it. But how it started out was, we need a movie, and we need it in 2 years, and you better get on that, JJ. So I see things from everybody's kind of perspective here. It's like, yeah, the movies we got, and they didn't do enough. But I'm not opposed to other things popping up in other media that help explain it, as long as it's a film or maybe one of these TV shows. But there's a hierarchy of canon, right? And comic books and novels are way down the list because they can be contradicted in a minute as soon as a TV show happens or as soon as a movie happens. So as long as it's one of the higher level canon items, if we get a reasonable and good explanation for some of the things that have come before, I'm okay with that. And it's how do you move forward in the best possible way without offending the people who enjoyed what they got or ignoring the people who were not happy with what they got. And it's a tough path. I mean, I don't envy anybody at Lucasfilm leadership right now because it's frying pan fire, basically. And that's what they're dealing with.
Disney continues to expand multi-platform storytelling, movies, shows, comics, novels, video games, etc. What is your assessment of the quality and continuity of the new content? And what, if any, time and spending expectations does this trend create for fans?
I'm gonna kind of preface this with my view of the fandom of Star Wars. And Jeff, you and I and Dave have talked about this. I don't know if Sean's heard my theory on this, but I kind of see the fandom as there's kind of the first class fans who buy all this stuff, who spend a tremendous amount of resources in Star Wars. And then there's like business class, which would be me. I know more than some people. I don't know as much as you guys. And then there's the coach, the people who just go to the movies, really like the movies, or maybe they'll do a book or a comic, but they're primarily the movie people. There's the people like my parents who fly standby, and if I catch it, I catch it. If I don't, I don't. And then you have the creators who would be like the pilots, the air traffic controllers, ground control, all that kind of stuff. So I think when you're talking about other media than movies and maybe television, you're not going to get a lot of the coach people in that. You might get some business class people. You'll probably get mostly the first class, the super fans that will dive into a lot of this stuff. So that's kind of my opinion. I myself have read some of the books. I like the quality of the books. I think there's some really great authors. I'm not a comic book fan. I never have been in my life. So just my preference. So unless there's a reason for the people in Coach to buy the book, they're just not going to go there.
I like the airline analogy. That definitely breaks it down well. There's the hardcore fans that are completists, and they're gonna partake in everything, and they're the ones that are gonna be in the know. For the rest of us in fandom, who, well, I'm pretty sure I'm business class as well. I might be sitting a little closer to first class, but I'm definitely not in Coach. I'm not taking in everything. I tried on this round of Star Wars. I was buying the Marvel comics and toys and the TV shows and the movies and all the stuff, and I was like into it. And I couldn't keep up, and I got a little jaded about the whole situation, because in order for me to be able to engage in conversations with other fans, I was having to devote a significant amount of time and resources to gathering and consuming a material. Because I get a situation where, well, what's this Snoke thing, and then Jeff's like, well, clearly you didn't read the thing about him being a gardener, right? And it's like that's what's going on in fandom, and it's we talk about the spending expectation. Disney has a spending expectation for us. I think that part of the strategy of having this multi-platform storytelling model is get our money. We'll make it happen in a comic, and it feels lazy to me, to be honest. I mean, it just feels really lazy. And then it's like they expect all of us to go out and buy this stuff, because until Jeff shared with us, I had no idea that Snoke was a gardener, and that his bro hugs to Kylo, or sorry, Ben Solo, turned him into Kylo. Right? We if you can't fit it in your 2.5-hour movie, then either you need to make 2.5-hour movies out of it, or you need to start trimming your story. I mean, look at George Lucas's original script for Star Wars. His original script is so bloated and convoluted that it ultimately got chopped up and made into 3 movies, right? And the world is better off for it. What Disney needs is a little, a little editing in a way. And so the expectation there is that we have to spend all this money. Well, not all of us have the money to spend. So one of the things that we had joked about and said on one of our previous broadcasts was, are you fan enough? And this is what it really boils down to, is that we are creating an environment, whether by accident or design, where if you don't have the money to give to Disney, then you're not going to be a true fan or a real fan, or you're not going to have the knowledge. Then you get into this nuanced conversation about who's really a fan. Oh, you're not a real fan. You didn't buy that comic, or you didn't get that kid's book, or you didn't get the little golden book about Kylo's hugs or whatever. And it's like, oh, come on. I can only go so far. I only have so much time in my day. Stacey, I hear you say these things like, well, I don't know this as well as you guys. Well, I feel bad when people say things like that. As a fan, you want to say, I'm a fan. And they're like, well, what kind of fan are you? And then we get into the analogy of, well, like, are you a business class fan? Are you a standby fan? Like, where do you, or are you on the no-fly list at this point? Sometimes I feel like I'm on the no-fly list.
When Rogue One came out on DVD, I took it down to my parents, and they had some neighbors come over, and we were watching it, and they're older, so we tend to have some breaks. During one of the breaks, their friend says, now, where's Han, Luke, and Leia in this? And I had to explain, well, remember in A New Hope, the crawl said the spies got the Death Star plans, and they say, yeah, so this is that story. So, I mean, even people who understand Star Wars at the fundamental level still don't always get what's going on. I just thought that was a really funny.
Oh, yeah, it's true. And I mean, there's a lot of people like the steerage passengers who have seen the original Star Wars, and then they come across something like Rogue One, and they're like, okay, now where is this? Is this before? Is this after? Again, we're talking, cinematic stuff, and like you say, a majority of the people who are casual consumers or interact with Star Wars in a non-first class way, they only deal with the movies. And so I'm concerned about this business model that Disney Lucasfilm has, because it's going to wind up like the legends, the quote unquote legends that we currently deal with, where there just became so much stuff. Somebody just finally had to say, okay, look, we're drawing a line, and everything is going to be on this side of the line. And then going forward, we're going to do these things, and they're going to have to do it to themselves. We can't even get the films, the saga films, to talk to each other story-wise. How are we expecting them to get children's books, novels, comic books, internet short 30-second animated stories all to work together? Like, it's a big ask. It's a huge ask. And then it's an even bigger ask to ask all of us to fork over money for it.
I have that problem in my family. I mean, we sat down and we tried to watch WandaVision, the series, and not 5 minutes into it, I was getting peppered by 4 different people, questions that I had no clue. And I fear that we will be going down that rabbit hole with Star Wars. And I want to be able to sit back and enjoy. That would be awesome. But I fear that with all these different shows and a couple of movies and things like that, it's just going to be so convoluted and so crazy that people are not necessarily going to understand the connections. And my wife or my kids, who aren't necessarily as invested as I, should be able to just go to the movie and not have a whole bunch of stuff that has to be explained. Like you've talked about, both of you, we're going to have to consume before we go and watch. That's not how movies should work. And it really actually absolutely frustrates me and makes me disappointed, because I really feel like I am moving to coach, and I feel like I am pretty passionate about the genre. I want to be able to stay current. I want it bundled.
Well, there's nothing wrong with enhancing. If all that material is out there, the books, the comics, all that stuff, if it's out there and it enhances the experience, absolutely great. Let me pick and choose. Let me hit that buffet. But if it's required for me to understand or enjoy, that's the problem.
So my parents, when we were watching The Mandalorian, I throwing them under the bus because they're just so casual about everything. When we're watching The Mandalorian, my mom is like, okay, so who's this Ahsoka person? Who's this? I mean, they don't know who these characters are. And I barely know who they are because I'm just starting Clone Wars. So again, I don't have a lot of time, so I can't spend a lot of time watching it. And I really hate having to bring this up when Kathleen Kennedy said it's too inside baseball. And I get the feeling sometimes that as we go forward with some of these things, that maybe Mandalorian's starting to come that way. And I don't know that my parents are going to watch the 3rd season. It's a slippery slope that Disney's going down with this model.
When Disney purchased Lucasfilm, all expanded universe content was nullified and a new canon was announced. However, Disney shows like Rebels and The Mandalorian have returned many characters and locations to the official timeline. Does Disney have an accountability to fans for the responsible stewardship of pre-existing Lucas content?
So are you referring to paying royalties to other people, or are you referring to just the content inside? Because if it's the royalties, absolutely, I think they deserve to be paid. But in terms of the content, if they jettisoned it and made it into legend, then no, I don't think they need to even address it. They are obviously picking and choosing what they like. I have, for the most part, no problem with wiping the slate clean. When you purchase something, you have that choice and you have that right, and I honestly don't have a problem with it.
Ditto.
Yes, they have an accountability to the fans for everything. They bought it. They are responsible to have some sort of stewardship over the entire franchise, canonical and non-canonical. It's part of the consciousness of the entire world at this point. So they do need to curate it and cultivate it and take care of it. But are they required to reintroduce everything that's come before in their new stuff? No, absolutely not. Is that a good idea even? Probably not. There's some bad stuff floating around in the now Legends universe. I give you Jackson the Rabbit and A Maze of Fox Train. These are characters that we probably don't need going forward. Some of the stuff that came in the 80s Marvel comic books and some of the more random and weird Dark Horse comics and out their novels, but there's a lot of really good stuff, and they should be mining the hell out of this for good story ideas and good characters, or things that could be paired together. You could take a couple of different characters and mash them together and make a new, better character. And it shouldn't be ignored, and it shouldn't be treated with disdain either. There is a vast fandom that were brought into the franchise through these things. So we have to respect the place that it has in the history of the Star Wars franchise. And I think Disney should respect that. And they should understand that by marginalizing the people who are fans of that, they're marginalizing a large portion of their fandom, if that's indeed what they're doing. But it doesn't really feel like it right now. I think that there was an institutional reset, and I think that was probably a good idea, because there was a lot of confusion when the purchase happened, because there were people like, well, what's going to happen with the Dark Horse comics, and what's going to happen with all these novels? And everybody kind of recognized, and even Lucas knew this. He was like, we'll let the kids go play, right? That's their sandbox, the novels and the comics and all these other things. But I make the movies. That's where the real canon is, and everything else is just kind of fun. But the Heir to the Empire trilogy, the Zahn, Admiral Thrawn trilogy, whatever you want to call it, was fantastic, and it kind of reinvigorated the franchise. And I'm glad they brought Thrawn back in. Am I 100% happy with the way he's been done in the novelizations? No. But I appreciate the fact that he hasn't been forgotten, and I appreciate the fact that Timothy Zahn, the guy who created him, is allowed to recreate him in the new image that Disney wants. And every time you pull something out of canon or out of Legends and put it in canon, you make a whole other group of people really happy. It's their prerogative. They own it. They paid $4.05 billion for it, right? So they can do whatever they want with it. But it's all there, and when used correctly, it just enhances everything. Again, it comes down to interacting with the fans and letting the fans know that we respect your opinion, or we appreciate your fandom, and we understand that this is why you're here. And so we are going to pull those things here and there. But anyway,
I have a question. So do you feel that some of the backlash towards the sequels has something to do with Kathleen Kennedy and her Forces female centric push?
I don't know that she has an agenda, other than she wants girls to know that it's okay to play Star Wars, to love Star Wars just as much as the boys. I did when I was a kid. Was I invited on the playground to, play Star Wars? No, but when my cousins and I got together, we all did. And it was about being able to identify with these characters. I think when you have a Finn, when you have a Rose, and these kids see themselves reflected on the screen, I think that is very empowering. I can be very cynical and say, yeah, it's a marketing ploy to get more fans. But at the same time, it's also a cultural awareness to embrace Star Wars just as much as we have when we were kids.
In the larger fandom, which is a representative of all of society, there is a segment of the fandom that is angry at Kathleen Kennedy for perceived crimes. I would say that there are people that are mad because of Rey and Finn and other things, Rose, etc. I think a lot of people who have been unhappy with the storytelling and other things in the new movies have been lumped in with those people as a convenience to protect Disney Lucasfilm from criticism. But when you start to see and hear these other comments that are being made by the people who are involved with making the films, and you see Kathleen Kennedy and the Lucasfilm story group show up to an event all wearing t-shirts that say the Force is female, you kind of say, okay, well, what's Rey all about? It starts to impact our ability to separate all of that from the films. The question about, is there an agenda or is there politics? Maybe, but we don't really know. It's never been explicitly laid out, but it's implicit in some of the things that have happened surrounding the individuals involved with these products. And so it's very hard for us to separate all that. And so then of course this all feeds into stances about whether you're a real fan or not a real fan, or whether you're a jerk or not. Like it just becomes very problematic. I am a cynic. I'm a hardcore cynic, and I embrace that. I understand that. I think that once Lucas the man left Lucas the company, all bets are off in the humanitarian department. Everything that's being done is, yes, in an attempt to expand the fan base, but not for altruistic purposes. I think they're trying to expand the fan base to simply perpetuate a fan base into the future that they can continue to ask to spend money on comic books and movies and novels and toys. On an intellectual level, I don't have a problem with that, right? That's what businesses do. Businesses create products, they sell them to customers, and they try and create new customers to sell more products. Okay, great. Lucas had a vision, and his vision for the sequel trilogy was also to be focused around a female main character. And so I don't think that this is something that Kathleen Kennedy came up with. I do understand the idea of representation. I understand what it means. It doesn't matter that we have a black stormtrooper or an Asian rebellion technician, or that we have a female Jedi. What matters to me is that these characters were not well developed and that their story arcs were flat. But what I resent is the fact that when I say something like, I don't like Rey's character because she has no flaws, she has no real, her arc is very flat. I mean, there's a slight arc there, but it's very flat compared to other characters. And when I say that the writing of her character is not good, that I get lumped into a group of people who are not honest actors, and they're mad because of either gender or racial politics or whatever. I don't care about what the characters look like, whether they're aliens or what their gender is or who they sleep with or whatever. I don't care. As long as their story's good, I can buy into that, because yes, there is representation. This is culture, but I would say that yes, we do need to work on expanding the fandom, right? Because eventually all the 40-year-olds like myself who grew up with this stuff and have been here for the whole thing, we're all going to die soon, and that's life. And it's not just Star Wars. I mean, it's really any franchise. I mean, you have a real problem with the culture of trying to make things stick with younger people. There's going to be some challenge in trying to do long-form storytelling and deal with the ever-shrinking attention spans of future generations.
Our discussion has come to an end. Thank you, David.
May the Force be with you.
Thank you, Sean.
Me so like it is.
Thank you, Stacy.
Cheers.
And thank you to all our subscribers and supporters. It has been a difficult year for many personal, professional, and societal reasons, but Star Wars and this channel, these shows, are bright spots that keep me moving forward. I hope they do the same for you. Stay on target for the second year of Galactic Initiative.
Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement.